10, I'd been sexually abused. I was sexually abused from the age of 8 to 10. By the age I got to 15, I was gang raped. I was forced to lay on the bed. I went to bed. I went to sleep. Woke up, I found I was tied to the bed. I found that I was not only tied to the bed, but there was a knife cutting my nightie off. I endured hours all through the night of 4 men and a woman raping me throughout the night, including having a screwdriver pushed so hard inside me that I couldn't stand the pain. And I can remember wishing for death. Death was seemed like such a much better option than living. But what they did is what grooming gangs are doing right now on our streets. They've used my family as a way of silencing me. I ended up homeless, living on the streets, where I met a young girl. She was 12 years old. She was 12 years old and homeless because her father had been abusing her. She ended up, a Muslim grooming gang had asked her to come with them. They would give her somewhere safe to stay, somewhere warm, somewhere where you would feel looked after. And when you're a 12-year-old child, it's very easy to convince them that you care. And when you're lost and you don't know what you're doing or where you're coming from, it's very easy to be taken in by false reality. I remember sleeping in a sleeping bag with her to keep her warm. She was a tiny little thing. She didn't look much more than 8. One particular night, she had to get enough money. By this time, she had a drug habit, and she had to get enough money to pay her pimp. If she didn't, she got a good bloody beating for it. A particular guy pulled up. When he pulled up, I didn't want her to go. In fact, I would have gone out, and I did steal. I stole to Fevers, and I would have done it again. But she went with him. He was a large man, sleazy looking. I could hear her screaming down the side alley. When I went down, he was on top of her, and putting it quite crudely, whilst he was fucking her, he was beating her. I took the only thing I could find, which at the time was a bowl, and I hit him in the back with it as hard as I could. I managed to drag her out, and I went to the police because he'd beaten her to such an extent she wasn't breathing properly. I told them that I would tell them where she was, but they wanted my name, and if I told them my name, I was going to be going home to where my rapist was still visiting my father. So I lied, and I gave them a false name. And then I ran. But because I took that girl off the streets, the prince decided that the money that she owed for her drugs that they'd forced on her was now my debt. I spent several weeks fleeing to keep away, to keep safe from these men that wanted to push me into prostitution. Now, I lied my way off the street, and I'm lucky enough to be stood here today, a survivor. I'm not a victim, and I don't want anybody's pity, but I am a survivor. But these girls in Rotherham and Rochdale and Oxford and Stevenage and Peterborough and Telsley and every other place you can think of that are being groomed on a daily basis and being raped on a daily basis and being pushed out like they are nothing are being ignored. And injustice is happening, and we are all sitting back while it happens. Why are we sitting back? Do all of you have children? Will they not become mothers? Will those mothers not have sons? Do we not owe it to them to stand up and say enough is enough? Does our government not owe it to us to stop ignoring the problem and appeasing the radical Islam that is out there, that is grooming our children? And it isn't just our children. Look at the children being radicalised. So who's going to protect them from being radicalised? If we don't do something and we don't speak out, then we're not stopping the problem. We are allowing it to continue. And not all of us will be lucky enough to be stood here like I'm stood here today. And I carry no shame whatsoever. It's their guilt. And they can carry it because I will not carry their burden. But what I will do is I will carry the burden of every girl who has been raped, groomed, trafficked, tortured, marked. You name it, they've done it, and I will do whatever it takes to stand up for every single one of those girls. And if you can't do that, there is something seriously wrong. Now the one thing I want to do, if you can bear with me just 1 second, I have a girl's story here, and I think it's really important that you hear it. So if you just give me 1 second, please. Now, as I say, this is not my story, this is somebody else's. This is why mothers and fathers, the future generation, the parents of the future generation, you need to pay attention to what is going on around us. We can't keep pretending it's not happening when it is. So I will tell you. My name is Nicola. I was almost 14 when it started happening to me. It all began with the promise of a modelling job. I was a particularly confident girl, and when Daniel, the photographer, asked me to do some glamour modelling for him, I was flattered, and I thought it might be fun. Modelling can seem like easy money. Get dressed up, smile for the camera, what's so hard about that? He came to my home one morning while my parents were working, and we had the house to ourselves. He started by taking regular pictures of me, then, by stages, asking me to remove more and more clothing. Eventually he said that we needed new scenery, and I asked if there was a bedroom we could use. I was a bit taken aback as I wasn't expecting to have to use a bedroom. He continued taking pictures, eventually asking me to strip to my underwear. That's when I knew that something just wasn't right. I was shaking and scared, but I did as I was told. More photos were taken. Suddenly I heard the front door being unlocked and opened, followed by some voices. A family member had come home. I panicked and I jumped up, running to the door and holding it shut, shouting to them that I'd just got out of the bathroom for them not to come upstairs. When I turned around, Daniel had taken off his clothes. I'd never seen a naked man before. I froze. Sorry, bear with me. I froze and felt myself going red with embarrassment. He told me to get on the bed and be quiet or I'd be heard. Daniel then raped me and laughed when he realised that I was a virgin. When he was finished, he threw a £10 note down and told me to get some nice underwear. He kissed my cheek and he told me he would be in touch. He kept his promise. He was in touch, constantly. He started asking me to do favours for his friends, threatening to show my parents the pictures he had taken of me if I refused. I could continue to do as he had told me for a long time. When I started to object and tell him I didn't care who he showed the pictures to, he began beating me to make me do as I was told. When my mum eventually found out what was happening, she called the police. They weren't very helpful. They told my mum that I was a known prostitute and that she should leave me to it, and that I would stop when I was ready. I was 15 years old at the time. The police knew what was happening to me long before my mum did. The officer who sent me to take my statement was a tall and intimidating man. He asked me to go into very intimate details of what happened to me. I was very upset and he told me that I'd have to get used to his line of questioning and that this is what I would have to deal with in court. He was very aggressive and seemed angry. He told me he couldn't offer me any protection if I testified in court, and for that reason I never testified against my rapist. His attitude and manner put me off ever considering police help again. Instead, I contacted medical professionals, some who didn't believe me. By the time I was 16, I'd moved into a youth hostel because Muslim men would turn up at my home and hang around in cars. Sometimes they'd even knock on the door in groups. Men in their 20s, 40s and 50s. They didn't care what anyone thought of them. They just wanted their depraved sex needs satisfied. And they followed me round like dogs. They threatened to hurt my family if I didn't cooperate. Can you see a pattern here? You see the pattern? Don't use the kid, use the family. So much more powerful. They said they would pour acid down my throat if I told anyone about their threats. As a result of all this, I started to self-harm in a bid to make myself less attractive to men. I did it on a daily basis, covering myself with hundreds of cuts. It eventually became a comfort and a release and a punishment rolled into one. These Muslim men made me feel bad, dirty, worthless and ashamed. They made me hate myself and I'd become what I was. I was 16. I've tried to commit suicide multiple times but I could see no escape from them. Things went from bad to worse after I moved into the hostel. I was seeing up to 8 men every 2 hours. One after the other, some waiting in line and coming back for seconds. I wasn't allowed to leave the bed, or use the toilet, or wash myself, until they were finished with me. None of them used protection. Most days I would be called in on the morning, the afternoon and the evening. It was never just once a day I was needed, and it was never individual men. They always operated in groups. They didn't care if I was sore or crying or bleeding. They would just laugh and carry on. I contracted several STIs as a result of the unprotected rapes. Treating them was pointless as I kept contracting them over and over again. There was a point, briefly, at which I did feel the men were taking care of me. They fed me, gave me drink, forced me into drugs. Oh, doesn't that also sound very familiar? That doesn't look like caregiving to me, to anyone with good self-esteem, but I didn't have any, and so the slightest bit of care was welcomed and seemed nice. I was adrift with no one to care for me and no way out of violence and threats put to me by these Muslim men. They have hurt and humiliated me. Sorry, bear with me. I've been raped with a knife at my throat, a drill taken to my kneecaps, kicked, slapped, punched, gang raped, bottled, and all of it topped off, yet again, by more rapes. These men are predators. They recognise me on the street today, and they ask me to help them find young girls. They're sick and depraved and lacking the maturity to go after any real women. Any woman in their right mind would refuse their men. They say things to me like, I remember picking you up from school. Your tits look the same today as they did when you were 14. One of them told me how he raped a 13-year-old girl. I know, a 13-year-old girl I know in a hotel. Keeping her there all night and raping her in every orifice. They tell me other horrific things they've done to women, including their wives. They talk and laugh about these things among themselves as though they were normal conversation. I've been offered money to marry men in order to get them into this country. The list of atrocities is long, and I'll leave it there. I'm not the only girl this is happening to. There are very many who will never tell their tales. The vast majority of Muslim males are getting away with crimes, even the ones who have been reported. The tragedy is that the girls are the ones who are being blamed. They were out after dark. They were mature for their age. They were street smart. They're trouble. No one cares about them. Sorry, I lost my track. It's hit me, sorry. They're runaways and they'll just run away again. Why bother? We mustn't state the obvious, that these men are predominantly Pakistani men. Not every Muslim is a rapist, but I can tell you I have been raped by hundreds of men, and 98% of them have been Pakistani Muslims. That is a fact that has come to light up and down Britain. All of the records, all of the social services accounts, all of the police reports very clearly support this, and you cannot argue with facts. These are the stories that are going on. These are the atrocities that are happening, and these are the things that our government, social services and police have left undealt with. They have let these girls down, and we as mothers, fathers, parents are not going to continue to let it happen. So on that note, I'm going to give me 2 seconds to work out who the next speaker is. Be 1 minute, please.